Hi guys, so the Brexiteer way is always, when in trouble, blame someone else for your shortcomings. And this brings us to Lord Frost, the former minister and negotiator who was amongst friends at the right-wing think tank Policy Exchange. There he spoke for about an hour, blaming the EU and Ireland for his mistakes. In one part of his speech, he accused the Irish government of disrupting the balance in Northern Ireland and claimed that the Belfast or Good Friday Agreement was at risk. He also said that Dublin had prioritised protecting the European single market over working in a collaborative way with London on Northern Ireland. It fears being cut off from the single market itself, and it recognises it must maintain influence in the EU. I hope Ireland feels it got good value from the EU for acting like this. It doesn't look 100% clear to me that it always does, and certainly its negotiating capital on the subject seems close to exhausted. This statement demonstrates that Frost doesn't understand Ireland, its historical connection to Britain, and how it has shifted to the EU over the last number of decades, but even more so since Brexit. David, Ireland did not do the negotiations, the EU did. But of course, he has to blame them in order to keep favour with Unionists in Northern Ireland. Ireland did not vote for Brexit. Northern Ireland did not vote for Brexit, but yes, there was a fear in some quarters that Brexit would have forced a border on the island of Ireland, which would have put the Good Friday Agreement in jeopardy, or a border between Ireland and the EU, putting the Irish economy and its own membership in serious trouble. Of course, there was mistrust towards London. They kept accusing Ireland and the EU of undermining Brexit. Frost and Johnson kept threatening to pull the plug. When the EU said that Northern Ireland needed to be sorted out before a TCA could be agreed, this was met with anger in London. In the end, they took that road anyway. It's important to remember also that the British government never provided any serious solutions to the situation in Northern Ireland. At the beginning of the talks, they ignored Northern Ireland. When it became clear that it couldn't, Jacob Rees-Mogg popped up with his unicorn of an electronic border. Does David now see why Brussels and Dublin were concerned? Anyway, he went on, we should ourselves, of course, continue to try to work constructively with Ireland bilaterally. But I'd like to see Ireland acting in the same spirit, not disrupting the balance in Northern Ireland by constantly using vague and destabilizing language about tectonic shifts in the north, where they're talking the supposed all-Ireland economy. Ireland is an EU member state. The negotiations take place between the EU, not bilaterally with Ireland on this. The Irish government's priority has always been to defend the Good Friday Agreement, because it is them that have the most to lose if it goes pear-shaped in Northern Ireland. They had this crisis thrust upon them. They never wanted it, but they were forced to deal with a proven liar and charlatan like Boris Johnson, knowing that they were expected to take him at his word when he said X or Y. Frost also mentioned that he was surprised that the EU was resisting British demands to renegotiate the protocol, saying that if the agreement could not be improved through negotiation, Britain would act unilaterally. It would be entirely reasonable, in my view, for the government to act unilaterally to override key elements of the protocol in domestic law. In doing so, it would be safeguarding its highest obligations to the Belfast Agreement. This man has yet to point out any problems with the protocol, never mind issues that can't be fixed outside the scope, but his solution to these fantasy problems is to renegotiate the whole thing. I personally do not believe that acting outside the protocol would raise or need raise any issues of wider UK compliance with international law. On the wider issues, our track record speaks for itself. The UK is one of the most outspoken advocates of an international system based on agreed rules. Yes, David, a track record of threatening to break international law in a limited and specific way. One of the problems he raised in his speech was that he and Boris Johnson were forced to respect a deadline. What is important to remember is that they set the deadline. At first it was the 31st of October. This was not a date that had to be respected because of some EU requirement. This was solely a political decision taken by Johnson. It was part of his attempt to break out of the problems that he had created himself in Westminster. The EU had, however, one simple condition at the time. We need to sort out Northern Ireland and then we can move on to the trade negotiation. This was a problem for Brexiteers. They wanted to get to the trade talks as soon as possible, but it seems either Johnson or Frost or both agreed to set a target, agree to stuff and then move on to the talks on trade. Frost in this regard complained about the Benn Act, which he called the Surrender Act. What a wonderful man. Anyway, the Benn Act, which was backed by Parliament, much to the distaste of the unelected bureaucrat Frost, forced the British government to extend the negotiations and not leave without a deal. Frost blames this for taking away what he believed was a bargaining chip, but it's highly doubtful such a thing existed, as the UK government would have risked international condemnation if it had harmed the Good Friday Agreement. In the end, I think it was the fact that the negotiations were driven by Boris Johnson's short time frame, which he wanted to win an election within. Instead of extending and having a proper negotiation, Frost agreed to things either because he didn't understand them or he didn't care about them. Now he's blaming others for his and Boris Johnson's lack of foresight. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think about all of this. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.